Our topic tonight, strangely enough, even though it's Erev Rosh Hashanah, our topic is correct thinking and wrong thinking. Correct reasoning and incorrect reasoning. Now, when we talk about the effectiveness or the rightness of thinking, we're obviously not talking about a person who isn't thinking. Like, for example, if you're very emotional, of course your judgment is off, because you're not thinking. So, we're not going to talk about a person who is in a panic, or a person who is biased, or a person who is overwhelmed by emotion, and therefore the thinking process has been derailed. That's not the kind of issue that we're talking about. The issue is, when you are thinking, how do you know whether you're thinking right or thinking wrong? Of course, we're assuming that there is wrong thinking, and that not every opinion is correct. If we think every opinion is correct, then there's no such thing as wrong. So, when a person is thinking, it can still be wrong. And what determines, and how do we know, whether it's right or wrong? Obviously, a person can make a very logical argument. His argument makes a lot of sense. If you begin where he begins, in other words, given the assumptions that he's making, after that, he's very logical. If the world will stop producing wheat, then the wheat we have produced will not be enough to feed the whole world and we'll all starve. That's logical. But why are you assuming that we stop producing wheat? Who's going to stop producing wheat? So it's not time to panic yet. So the argument is logical, but it's based on a false assumption. There were scientists who proposed some very logical, convincing arguments, but when it was put to the test, the theory didn't work. So what do we say? It's a good theory, it just doesn't work. Or, if it doesn't work, then obviously it's not a good theory. But when you look at the argument, it sounds logical. It's convincing, it's compelling. So let's take a look at some of the things that might cause our thinking to be off. We know that will influences thought in a positive sense. When you want to understand, your mind goes to work. You're motivated. When you want to know, you're more likely to understand. A motivated student will learn quicker than an unmotivated student. And the more motivated, the quicker he will learn, the better he will learn, the better he will understand. Because will makes the mind sharp. If you're forced to study a subject you're not really interested in, it's going to come very hard. The mind is not that alert, it's not that quick, it's not that perceptive. It's dull. Because you don't have the will behind it. That's the positive side. The negative side, of course, is if you've already decided how you want the argument to come out, that biases your thinking. It's not that you're too angry to think straight, or that you're too nervous to think straight, or that you're madly in love so you can't think straight, where emotions interfere with thinking. The will doesn't interfere with your thinking. It slants your thinking. You're thinking well. It's not that your mind is breaking down under the pressure. You're thinking logically, you're thinking well, but you've got a little bias. you're not completely neutral on the outcome. And why is that not good? Because the whole virtue of intelligence is that it can be objective. It pursues the truth. It wants to know what's what. But if your will already chose an outcome, then the objectivity is lost. You lose the objectivity, then your thinking is not right. Now again, we're not talking about other issues like values. If a person says, I thought things through, I debated the issue, and I decided that it wouldn't be terrible if I stole the car. Now, is that wrong thinking? Maybe not. His thinking may be solid. He won't get caught. He will manage it. He will get away with the car. He'll have a car. Everything will work out fine. His thinking is sound. You're going to object to his thinking on moral grounds. You're logical, you're right, you're reasonable, and you're thorough, but you're not allowed to steal. That's a different subject. So aside from introducing morality or values to the thinking, we're speaking here only about the effectiveness of the argument. Is it a logical, intelligent argument, or is something missing in the intelligence of it? So one of the things that might damage the intelligence is if you have a preconceived outcome. Why would that damage the intelligence? Again, because intelligence is supposed to be objective and arrive at an objective truth, and you have lost your objectivity. And that's why you're not allowed to take a bribe. A judge is not allowed to take or accept a bribe, even if he is convinced that it will not affect his thinking. He will still be righteous. He will not favor the person who's giving him the bribe. And it may very well be that he's correct. He's not going to favor, because he's a tzaddik. The Torah says a bribe twists even the words of the tzaddik, even the words of the righteous. How does that happen? It's not that he's going to go out there and argue in favor of one of them because he gave him a gift. He's not going to do that. He's looking for justice. And he will continue to look for justice. But for some reason, this guy's favor seems to be more just. So it's not that he's going to allow his feelings to interfere with his judgment. His judgment is going to be a little off. In other words, he has lost his objectivity. What does it mean to lose your objectivity? When a person is sitting in judgment, he can't afford to be self-conscious. Even in the sense of, I'm worried whether I am capable of making the right decision. If you're thinking that way, you're no longer objective. You're self-conscious. Am I making the right decision? It's not about you. If you introduce that, you've already lost your objectivity. Not because you're emotional, but because you are being subjective. And intelligence has to be objective. The daughters of Tzlofchad came to Moshe and said, there are no brothers in our family, only daughters. Do we inherit part of the land when we get there? Which tribe do we belong to? Where do we get our portion? When they introduced themselves to Moshe, they said, we are the daughters of Tzlafchad, and he was not involved in the argument against you. Do we get a portion of the land? And Moshe said, I don't know. I'll ask God and find out. Why didn't he know? It's not that complicated. Once they said, our father was not against you, they had introduced a subjective consideration, and he no longer trusted himself to be objective. That's pretty subtle. So, because intelligence, reason, has the gift of objectivity, any introduction of some subjective consideration ruins the clarity of the thinking and of the reasoning. This can come in one of two ways. It's either when somebody gives you the gift, the bribe, one of two things happens. You're either now relating to the bribe, if it was a significant bribe, you now feel, I got a pretty good gift. I now have a paid vacation. And that makes it subjective. Or, I guess on a higher level, a more subtle level, you're a righteous guy and you're not going to be so overwhelmed and impressed by a free paid vacation. But the guy who offers you a free vacation now sounds like a nice guy. So you're no longer neutral about him. He now appears to be nicer to you. So even if you can honestly say, this bribe means nothing to me. A vacation, I don't have time to take a vacation anyway. So even if you refuse the bribe, you say, no, I can't take a vacation, so no thanks. It's still possible that you have now become subjective because the guy offered it, so he's obviously a nicer guy. And you're no longer objective about the individuals. So the bribe can either be in that the briber appears as a nicer person, or because the bribe is something you've always looked forward to. You've always wanted a vacation, and now he's offering you a vacation. And you can't refuse it. So those are the two forms of bribery. It's either what the person does or what the person has become in your estimation. To be completely objective, you have to be neutral about the issue and about the people. And that's why there's also the commandment that you may not favor the poor out of pity, and you may not favor the rich out of respect. When two people come to court, doesn't matter whether they're rich or small or poor, whether they're important or unimportant, strong or weak, you have to see them as equal. Just two faceless people in the crowd with an issue. And you got to resolve the issue, not the people. So with the people, you have to be completely neutral. Rightful thinking versus wrongful thinking can also occur just in the brain itself, without interference of will or bribery. Every concept, every piece of wisdom has a basic light, a clarity. In each subject, in every issue, there's a clarity, which is intelligence. And that's why we say a person who knows what he's talking about sees clearly. I can see clearly now. The rain is gone. A person who is intelligent or very intelligent, we say he has vision. The mind's eye sees clearly. But what does it see clearly? It sees the light. The light bulb goes on. And so this is what happens. You're studying a subject, you're trying to understand it, and you're stuck. Because it's not adding up, it's not working out. The logic is not completing itself. Something's missing, something's wrong. There's a contradiction, there's a conflict, there's a gap. So you struggle. You go over it again and again, like an architect. He's got the whole thing pretty much designed, but two walls just don't seem to come together. There's something off. He doesn't know what it is. He looks again, he can't. All of a sudden, without any apparent reason, the light goes on in his head. He says, of course, I got it. I know what's wrong. That light, that is the essence of wisdom. However, the essence of the wisdom is a little slippery. And if you don't catch it, it'll slip away. And this happens quite often. That a person comes up with a brilliant idea and a minute later can't remember it. He knew he had it. And he can't remember what it was. So the trick is that you have to capture that idea and make it permanent. Get it fixed. Get it established in your mind. Put it into words. Because when the light comes, it comes without words. Now, it's not like those neon signs that are shaped into letters. It's just a light. And you have to decipher that light. Once you decipher it, you give it letters, you give it words. Now you can repeat it, now you can work with it. Now it's yours. You got it. The process of putting words to the idea is another job. There's a different part of the brain that does that. So if when you get the light, you don't then switch to the other part of your brain and start putting words to it, it'll slip away. It's an interesting thing. People who work very hard with their mind, when they get tired, what do? Listen to music. Yeah, they can go off and have something to eat. They can go off and dance or something. What they do is they switch brains. They're tired trying to come up with a new idea or trying to find an answer to a problem. So they switch. They go back to reading more about the stuff that they already know. Now, why aren't they too tired to do that? If their brain is tired, why are they not too tired to read the manual or to... It's because they're using a different part of the brain, and that part of the brain hasn't been active. It's not tired. So there literally are different brains that do different jobs. Actually, there are three. But let's talk only about two. The one part of the brain comes up with new insights, finds answers that weren't there before, always wants to know what it didn't know before, is always asking questions. The second part of the brain works with material you give it. If you give it a good idea, it will develop the idea, it'll put it into words, it'll explain it even to yourself, and you'll have a solid understanding, not a brilliant insight. Okay? So there's a difference between an insight into a subject and the grasp of a subject. Two different parts of the brain. So what happens is this. When you get a brilliant idea, now you have to capture it in words. If you're not careful, the words come out wrong. And suddenly you've got a whole theory that has nothing to do with the original idea that you discovered. You've gotten verblunget, you've gotten off on a tangent, you started off with a brilliant idea, you ended up with something else. Not wrong, logical, but without any bearing, without any connection to the original insight, that could make your thinking incorrect. You got derailed somewhere. In order for thinking to be healthy, the words have to match the principle. There's another interesting process. In order for an idea to be complete, and this is really fascinating, in order for an idea to be complete, you have to have two functions, the mind and the brain, so to speak. When you have the two functioning properly, then you have a sound idea. The mind and the brain. The mind has to be perceptive enough to come up with an idea, and the brain has to be receptive enough to hold the idea. If they don't match, if you have more mind than brain, then what's going to happen most often is that you will come up with brilliant ideas, and you will teach them and speak about them, and people will walk away amazed. Brilliant. By the time they get home, they're thinking, so what? What was the point? It's brilliant, but it has no meat, it has no weight. It's all nice sounding, but so what? There's no bottom to it. It's pointless. Because you could make the argument in the opposite, take the completely opposite opinion, and it'll be the same result. Some guy once, a scientist, came to a convention, a scientific convention, and every scientist had to present a new theory. This guy came prepared with a great theory, and he had, a PowerPoint presentation, and he had slides, and he had mathematical formulas all worked out. And what it basically argued was that at some moment in the night, the entire universe doubles in size. And he had these brilliant arguments. He presented it all, and the people, they were stunned. Brilliant. So he said to his colleague, he said, do you agree? What's your opinion? And different opinions were being thrown. Yes, maybe not. I don't understand a certain part of your theory. When it was all over, he said, guys, what is wrong with you? If everything doubles in size, then it's completely irrelevant. Now what's the difference? It's like this comedian who says, I can't believe this. Some guy broke into my house and replaced everything I had with an exact duplicate. So what? It's an exact duplicate. So what? How do you know it even happened? So you have an argument that sounds logical, but when you get home, it's like, so what? What's the difference? If everything doubles proportionately, nothing changed. I'm still half the size of the other guy. That happens when the mind is sharp and the brain is not. What happens if the brain is sharp and the mind is not? Then the idea will be off or damaged or incomplete because it'll be pedantic. It'll be solid, it'll mean something, but it won't have any light to it. It won't have any enthusiasm. It'll be a dry, dull concept. And one of the features or one of the qualities of intelligence is that it's bright. It's high energy. A concept without energy is missing something. And that's why you can study something or hear a lecture, and I mean, it's right, but there's no excitement. So you have to agree. You got to say, yeah, I suppose, yeah, you're right. Nobody's excited. So to get a really healthy idea, a really correct way of thinking, is to have a good balance between mind and brain. The mind provides the light and the excitement, and the brain provides the content, the weight, the significance, the difference. There's a little bit of a conflict within our reasoning, within our thinking, once we introduce values. Can you really be logical if you are a moral person? It's a problem. Rationalists, people who claim to be real straight-brained, will argue that anyone who believes, who has a faith, or who has some moral commitment, is no longer logical, is no longer open-minded, is no longer thinking straight. Because your values don't allow you to be completely logical. And there's some truth to that. So a person who believes in God can come along and give you a brilliant argument proving that there is a God. But that's not really intelligent, because he already decided that there was a God before he came up with the argument. By the same token, a guy who doesn't believe in God and comes up with a good argument to prove that there is a God still doesn't believe in God. Which means belief and think and logic are two separate worlds. You don't become a believer because of a good argument. And once you believe, your argument is not so good. You've got a little bit of a bias. You know the outcome before you start the quest. How can that be purely logical? So this is true. Of course, the problem is, if you don't believe in God, then you already have a conclusion as well. So who will have a really objective view? Somebody to whom it really doesn't matter whether there is or isn't a God. You know any such people? Most people have a position. They either want God to exist, they believe in him, or hope that he's there, and then there are those who desperately don't want him to exist and don't want to believe in him. Who is so neutral that they can say honestly, whatever conclusion we reach is fine with me? Very few people. So if we have to make a choice, do we start off believing and that kind of alters our thinking? Or do we start off not believing and have that alter our thinking? Well, as long as we're not thinking straight anyway, let's at least believe in God. So when we can't be perfectly objective, then we have to choose our value. And that is not based on pure logic. That's based on instinct, on faith. Now, let's get a definition of what faith means. If someone were to say to me, do you believe that there is life on Mars? Is that a legitimate question?
Yeah.
It depends on how we're using the word belief. Do you believe that there is life on Mars? Do you mean, will I swear to it and die defending life on Mars? No. And you probably don't mean it that way. You don't mean belief like a religious belief, right? You mean, do I think that it's possible for life to exist on Mars? All right, that's a more legitimate question. But do I believe? I believe in God, that's it. Nothing else really deserves belief. So, is there life on Mars? Oh, either there is or there isn't. I'm not going to get carried away with this. Another thing, is there life on Mars is something that we can discover. Of course, it's going to take a while. It's a long way to go. But if there is life on Mars, go there and you'll know for sure. To sit here and say, I do believe, I don't believe, that's not logical.
What's life?
Right.
Kind of life.
Right. And what do you mean by life? So when somebody says to you, do you believe there's life on Mars? You have to say, what do you mean by belief? And what do you mean by life? And what do you mean by Mars? And what do you mean, do you? You got to define everything. I mean, you got to say, what do you mean by Mars? You mean a planet Mars? Is it still a planet? I mean, look what happened to Pluto. I once thought Pluto was a planet. No, it's not a planet anymore. So we have to define our terms. So what does it mean? Is there life on Mars? Well, first of all, either there is or there isn't, not my problem. Secondly, if I really want to know, then I should hop a bus and go check it out. Because if you can check it out, then to sit back and say, it's too far to go, I'll just believe that there is. That's not faith, and that's sloppy thinking. So you can't substitute faith or belief for something that you should know. You're too lazy to go find out. So where does belief apply? Only to a subject which cannot be known. So in a sense, must we believe that God spoke at Mount Sinai? No. Find some people who were there and they'll tell you. I mean, there were people there, right? So find them, track them down, and ask them what happened. It's a knowable thing. It's not like God spoke on a mountain and the mountain is on Mars. Even that, with a lot of effort, you could get there and see for yourself. Here we're talking about God spoke to the Jewish people at Mount Sinai, which is right near the pyramids. I don't know where they are. In the Sinai. So find out who was there, hire a detective, and the crime scene investigators, and let them find the evidence. You're too lazy? Well, then you can't substitute faith because you're too lazy to go look or to find the witnesses. That's why, for example, people who say, I don't believe there was a Holocaust. Aside from the fact that it's anti-Semitic and disgusting, what do you mean you don't believe? It's an event. It happened in a certain location. It's not a subject for belief. And here's the danger. If you can substitute knowledge with belief, or belief for knowledge, then everything is possible. I believe we landed on the moon. Oh, I don't. You can take any position, argue any argument simply by saying, I don't believe it. I do believe it. It's so dangerous. Crooked thinking is probably the most dangerous thing human beings do, next to eating French fries. So where were we going with this? Faith means an absolute confidence in the truth of something that you cannot know with your mind. If you can't know it with your mind, then it is not a subject for the mind. It's not an intelligent issue. So you can't ask your mind to deal with it. When it's that super rational, when it is unrelated to intelligence, what tool do we have to deal with it? Is there life after death? Who are you asking? Well, if you ask me, is there life after death? Who are you talking to? You're talking to my mind? How's my mind supposed to know? That's not a rational question. What am I supposed to do? Add up two and two and come to the conclusion that there's life after death? The mind is capable of logic, of reasoning. You're asking me an unreasonable question. So who are you talking to? Well, maybe you're talking to my emotions. You're asking my heart if there's life after death. In other words, you're asking me whether I would like there to be life after death. Would I feel good if there was life after death? Would I feel bad if there was no life after death? If I tell you how I feel, will you now know whether there is life after death? So what do you mean you're asking me to tell you whether there's life after death? What part of me is supposed to answer that question? I know. You're asking me because I'm a rabbi. Therefore, you assume that I must have read or studied the part of Torah that says whether there is or isn't, and what it is if there is. So you're not asking me my opinion at all. You're not asking me if I think there's life after death, which is a good thing because I don't know. It's also a good thing because what do you care what my opinion is? Your opinion is just as good, since the subject is basically unknowable anyway. So the reason you're asking me is not to find out what I think or what I feel. You want to find out, what does Torah say? What does our tradition tell us? Not what does one guy think. It's a whole different subject. Where then does faith come from? When a person says, no, I know stealing is wrong no matter what argument you give me. It just is. It's wrong. How do you know that? What makes you say that? Well, I can't prove it, and I can't argue the case, but it's wrong. It's just wrong. I know that a Jew is not allowed to bow to an idol. Why? What's the harm? What's the damage? Can God really care? Will God be insulted? Is he that fragile? Is he that jealous? You're bowing to somebody else and not to him? He gets bent out of shape? Where's the logic here?
It says in the commandment.
It's wrong. It's not logically wrong. It's absolutely wrong, and I know this absolutely. So faith doesn't mean I think or I hope it's true. Faith means I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that this is so. When a person believes in something, it is much more real to him than when a person has effectively, thoroughly, and convincingly explained it.
So faith is an absolute.
Because no matter how good your explanation is, that proves that there must be a God, somebody smarter than you will come up with a better explanation to prove something else. So even if you're convinced that 2 and 2 is 4, because it makes so much sense, you're not absolutely sure. Unless you're stubborn. But it's not the intelligence that makes you sure. By definition, a mind can never be absolutely sure. Because if it's a good mind, it should be able to come up with the other side of the story as well. So on the one hand, yes, 2 and 2 does equal 4, But on the other hand, there's got to be another hand. Otherwise, you're not very intelligent. So when a person says, 2 and 2 is 4, and it must be 4, this is becoming a religion. If you're talking logical, you can't say it must. Logical means objective. It must, that's dogmatic. You've lost your intelligence when you get so dogmatic. So intelligence cannot say absolutely. It can only say logically. Faith means absolutely true. How can it be absolutely true? Because it doesn't depend on my logic. Make sense? All right, so now the question is, if it's not coming from your logic and it's not coming from your emotions, where'd you get it? Where did you get this absolute certainty that this is in fact true? Or to put it in different words, where do you carry this faith? It doesn't fit in the brain. It doesn't fit in the heart. Where do you house it? Here's a fascinating insight into the nature of faith. When we say that something is true, what do we mean by that? It's true. What do you mean it's true? It's a fact. It's a fact. Water runs downhill. That's true? Not always. There's some places in the world where water runs uphill. It runs north. Even if there isn't, it could be, right? The point is that even a fact doesn't have to be true. It happens to be, doesn't have to be. So the fact that it happens to be doesn't make it true. True would mean this is the way it's got to be. Water has to run downhill. Well, that's not true. Water does run downhill. It has to? I don't know that it has to. We believe that Mashiach is coming. You believe it, you hope it, you think it. He has to come. That's called true. The coming of Mashiach is a truth. So even if it hasn't happened in fact, it doesn't matter. It has to be. So if not today, tomorrow. Not this year, next year. But it has to be. That's called faith. Faith doesn't mean I think it is. Faith means it certainly is. And what is? It's not a fact, it's a truth. In other words, there are certain things in the world, in nature, in creation, that are the way they have to be. Those things are true. Anything that isn't the way it's supposed to be is a fact, but it's not true. The truth is, all human beings are good. Is that a fact? No, it's not a fact. So why do we keep insisting that it's true? Doesn't make any sense. You say all people are good, take a look at the facts. They're not good. I don't care. All people are good. Basically, deep down inside, they're all good. In other words, you're proclaiming a truth, even though it's not yet a fact. And because it's a truth, you're absolutely certain that sooner or later, that's the way it's going to be. Because in the end, the truth will prevail. Now, how do we know what's true? Where do we get that from? The answer must be that there's a part of us that is true. And that part in us knows truth when it hears it. It rings true. When something rings true, whose response is that? It rings true to what? To your brain? Your brain doesn't know truth from a falsehood. To your heart? Your heart doesn't know what's true. It only knows what it likes. So which part of you is a maven, is the connoisseur of truth? The part of you that is true. And that is your soul. The soul is a spiritual being. To the soul, spiritual beings are true, are real, are definite. So if you ask your soul, you think there's a God? What would your soul say? Your soul would say, I'm looking at him. What do you mean, do I think? I'm looking at him. To the soul, God is real. When our mind accepts that impulse from the soul, that's called faith. What do you get from your soul? You get an impulse that says, true is true. Now the question is, what's true? But the fact that we look for truth, the fact that we care whether something is true or not, that comes from the part of our soul that sends that signal down to the rest of us that says some things are true, and that's true. So now we run around saying, something is true. What is it? I know. Something's... And that's why the agnostic is without a soul. In some way worse than the atheist. Because the atheist also has an impulse that says some things are just flat out true. There's no God. The believer says some things are absolutely true. There's a God. What does the skeptic say? Who says anything is true? Whatever you think is true is true. But what's really true? Nothing. Nothing's really true. You think it's true, fine. I think something... there is no real truth. It's just a word we use. That's a person who's getting no signals from his soul. Because to the soul, there are no arguments. There is no logic. There are no emotions. What is. So the question, how do we get our soul to tell us not only that something is true, but what is true? How do we get to know what our soul knows? Yeah, there is a silent method. What can we compare this to? You're sitting in a courtroom. A man is accused of killing another man. How do you know it's true? Suddenly somebody walks into the room and says, I'm a witness. I was there. I saw it. Oh, okay. Now we know. And if there's capital punishment in this particular state, this man is going to die. How do you know so certainly that he is guilty? Somebody was there. Somebody saw. When we ask our soul to tell us what it knows, it's like asking our soul to testify. What do you see? Don't tell me an opinion. A witness can't come in and say, I think he's guilty. If you ask me, I think he's guilty. He looks guilty to me. He's the type. Now, that's not a witness. The witness has to say, I saw it with my own eyes. That's what faith means. Not, I believe there's a God. I believe what my soul testifies to. Isn't that fascinating? The soul doesn't believe in God. He sees him. The mind doesn't believe in God, doesn't talk to God. The mind senses what the soul sees and trusts it. So really, what are you believing? You're believing what your soul testifies to. It's almost like saying, you trust the Jew in you. Because the Jew in you stood at Mount Sinai. You trust the soul in you, because the soul in you is spiritual and therefore knows God. Here's an interesting thing. Every soul knows its creator. Only bodies don't know their creator. So every human being in the world knows their creator. The question is, do they communicate it down to their mind? Does it translate into action? But there's something unique about a Jew. We don't only believe in God, we also believe in Torah. That same certainty that the soul has that there is a creator because he knows he's creator. We have that same certainty concerning Mount Sinai. That's why we say every Jewish soul that will ever be born was present at Sinai. What is that supposed to mean? It means that the event at Sinai is so visible, so real to our soul, that it's like every other soul has a real knowledge or awareness of its creator. So, when you ask a Jew, do you believe in God? What is he supposed to say? He's supposed to say, if I was in touch with my soul, I would be. I would be believing in God. Do you believe in Mount Sinai, that God gave us the Torah? If I was in touch with my soul, yes, I would believe it. So if I don't believe it, what am I missing? Will it help if I go read a good book on the subject? Not really. If you can find a book that will tell you how to become more in tune with your soul, that's a good book. How does your mind and heart get to hear clearly what your soul is saying and seeing? This is called clearing the channels. How do you clear the way, clear the path, so that what your soul knows will be communicated to your mind and heart? Sometimes a good argument will help. All it will do is get your mind to calm down, and then it'll hear what the soul has to say. But when your mind is agitated with arguments against, oh, but I can't see, how can I know for sure? If your mind would calm down, it would hear what the soul is saying. But there are better ways. There are better ways of sensitizing the mind and heart, and that is through doing the mitzvahs. Every commandment we obey sensitizes some part of our system so that we are now more in touch with our soul. More in touch with your soul, now you know what it knows. So here's the important punchline. If in fact that is true, that faith means hearing your soul testify, then you can't believe anything. A person can't say, well, you may not believe it, but I believe in ghosts. Is your soul telling you that there are ghosts? I just made up a religion and I believe it. You don't believe it. You think it. If you made up a religion, then it's not your soul telling you. So if you decide to believe it, that's make-belief. It's not belief, it's make-belief. To believe is limited. You can only believe the things your soul experiences. So what about a person who says, my soul experienced something strange and now I believe it? Was it your soul? Or was it indigestion? All of a sudden you're in touch with your soul? You weren't yesterday? No, my soul came to me and told me. You're fantasizing. That's not belief. Ah. How do you know when your soul is really talking to you, or you're just hallucinating, or wishful thinking, or you're suggestible, you're gullible? I think one of the there are many ways to approach this, but one of the distinguishing features, if it's really your soul talking to you, it will speak to you in a still, silent voice. Because to the soul, this is reality. If it's telling you a simple reality, it doesn't have to shout. It doesn't get hysterical. When you hear your soul, you don't become hysterical. You become rooted. Well, yeah, if that's what's what, true is true. When you become excited about a truth, then you have to start to suspect that maybe this is something other than your soul talking. When people become zealous, when they become hyper about a principle of faith, they're not talking about faith. They're talking about some ambition. There's something else going on here. This is not the language of the soul. The soul has a certain tone, and it's the tone of simple truth. It sounds that way. Simple truth. Exciting, zealous enthusiasm, that is something else going on here. That's not the language of the soul. Joy and pleasure, yes. But excitement and zealousness, no. It's almost like if somebody insists a little too much that something is true, doesn't that tell you that they don't really believe it? That they're trying to convince themselves while they're convincing you? If somebody gets angry at you for not believing what they believe, something's fishy. Why should they be angry at you? They now know what's true. Why does it threaten them that you don't agree? Something's fishy. So that's, I think, the most practical way of knowing whether it's coming from the soul or it's coming from some other agenda. On the theme of Rosh Hashanah, the sound of the shofar is supposed to awaken in us that absolute truth, that absolute certainty that we have. And that's why when you hear the shofar blown, you don't get excited and ecstatic. You walk away reminded that you really are a Jew. It's true. There really is a God, whether you like it or not. Whether you care or not, there is. There is a Torah and there is Judaism. Why does the shofar have that effect? Because it's an uncomplicated, simple sound. It's not a sophisticated instrument. And that simple sound somehow digs its way into past our heart and past our mind and past all our resistances and says, come on, can't you just recognize truth when you see it? I'm not asking you to get excited, but true is true, isn't it? And you have to say, yeah. Yeah. I'm a Jew. Yes, today is Rosh Hashanah. Yeah, God. It's all true. So you're going to run home and dance and sing? No. But you've been in touch for at least a moment. You've been in touch with truth. That's your faith. That's called believing. Now if you can come home and get your mind to participate, if in fact I am a Jew, and if in fact there is a God, and if in fact God gave a Torah, what are we going to do about this? Let's make a plan, a rational plan. But it's a rational plan about an absolute truth. Then you are acting on your faith. It's very enlightening to know yourself, because there's so much going on that we can't explain. I don't know why certain things make me feel. I don't know why certain things threaten me. I don't know why certain things feel so good. We need to know. We need to know. Can't walk around blissfully unaware of ourselves. And the psychological explanations, they don't add up. They don't add up. You know, somebody says, at this time of the year, Jews give a lot of charity. You know why? They're afraid. They're trying to buy their way into heaven. Just in case there's a God, here's a couple of bucks. That's not true. First of all, we don't scare so easy. And the proof of it is, all year we're not scared. You know, if God is real, then he's real all year. And if you're afraid, then you should be afraid all year. It doesn't make any sense to be afraid 1 week out of the year. That makes no sense. Well, it's a superstition. Jews are not superstitious. Well, we are, but only a little bit. It doesn't explain it.
Does he make a judgment during this particular time of the year?
Yeah, how do you know that? It's a superstition? There's something much deeper. All Jews come to synagogue on Yom Kippur, even though all year round they're not religious, and even on Yom Kippur they'll tell you, I am not religious. So what are you doing in the shul? Non-religious people don't go to church. You claim you're not religious, why are you in shul? What's the answer?
They scared you when you were young. You know, where you gotta go.
It's a serious holiday.
Yeah, it's a serious holiday. You see what goes on in the synagogues? There's nothing serious going on there. There's a cantor, there's a speech, people dress up. What's so serious?
Exchanging messages.
What's so serious? But not to be there? What are you talking about? It's from Kippur. I'm not religious, I don't believe in God, but it's Yom Kippur.
But you give up eating, I mean, that's serious.
That's, oh yeah. Well, until you get home anyway. They certainly don't eat in the synagogue. But the point is that you can't be religious 1 day out of the year. And that's why most people call it hypocrisy. It's not hypocrisy. It's so real. The Jew who goes to synagogue on Yom Kippur is basically stating to the whole world, God is real. I don't want him to be. I don't believe in him. I don't want to hear from him the rest of the year. But that doesn't change the fact. God is real. And today is Yom Kippur, and a Jew has no choice but to show up. Because he believes in God? Doesn't matter. Because he's religious? Doesn't matter.
I think it's just in case it's true.
The people who show up are not superstitious. They show up because a Jew is supposed to do that. Oh, really? I didn't know you were so religious. I'm not. Isn't that an amazing thing? And that was one example for it. If a guy is running hysterically, madly down the street, and you stop him, and you say, What? What are you so excited about? He says, my wife is not feeling well, I'm running for the doctor. So you say to him, that is so beautiful. I mean, really, you seldom find such a love between a husband and wife. Look at you, you're hysterical, you're running. And he says, wait a minute, I didn't say anything about love. I'm not sure if I love my wife. Lately, we're not getting along so well. Right? So imagine you would say to this person, well, if you don't love your wife, why run? Go slow. You run, accidents can happen. Be careful. Go. In fact, sit down, we'll talk about it, have a cup of coffee, then you'll go for the doctor. What would the man say to you?
You're crazy.
Are you crazy? My wife needs a doctor. You say, but you don't love her. So what? What's love got to do with it? The same thing with Jews. A Jew shows up on Yom Kippur in shul, and you say to him, you're not religious. He says, that's right. You don't believe in God. He says, that's true. So you say, well, then don't come to the synagogue. He says, what are you, crazy? It's Yom Kippur. You see the beauty of that? It's not that Yom Kippur is important because I believe it. It's not that Yom Kippur is real because it makes me feel good. It's not Yom Kippur is real because it fits with what I believe. No, it's just real. Without me, it's real. Even if I wish it went away, it doesn't. It's real. I don't love my wife, I can't talk to my wife, but if your wife needs a doctor, what are you, crazy? You're going to stop and have coffee? Real is real. And that's why the Jew who goes to synagogue once a year on Yom Kippur is closer to God than somebody who practices a religion every day of the year. Because in the religion, God is important because you're religious. See, if I wasn't religious, I wouldn't go. If you weren't religious, you wouldn't go. If you weren't religious, you wouldn't serve God. If you weren't religious, you wouldn't believe in God. So God is a product of your religiosity. That's all it is. The day you stop being religious, God stops existing. The day you stop loving your wife, you can have an affair with somebody else. That's all it is. That's not real. So if a man is devoted to his wife every day of his life because he loves her, that's not good. A wife is not a love. She's a real person with real needs, and sometimes needs that you don't understand and you don't love. So that makes her less of a wife? So then you don't have to run for the doctor? That's horrible. So the man who runs to the doctor but doesn't love his wife is a much better husband than somebody who loves his wife, because if he didn't, he wouldn't run for the doctor. It's much better to be a Jew who doesn't believe in God but comes on Yom Kippur than to be a Jew who believes in God because he likes it. Because he has a good argument. Take away the argument, nothing left. So the Jew coming to the synagogue on Yom Kippur proves that our connection to God is not a choice. It's not a feeling. When I feel like I'm Jewish, I don't feel like I'm not. If I feel like I'll believe. If I don't feel like it. No. God is God. It's true. Yom Kippur is Yom Kippur. It's true. A Jew is a Jew. That's true. Do I like it? No. Do I want to hear more about it? No. Don't ever bother me again. I came on Yom Kippur. Don't start with Sukkot and Simchas Torah with me. You give them a finger, they want the whole hand. Enough is enough. I'm here because God is God. I'm Jewish. It's Yom Kippur. But I don't want to hear about this anymore. And even when I come to the synagogue on Yom Kippur, don't give me these long, boring sermons. Leave me alone. I'm not religious. That's beautiful. That proves that our relationship is much stronger, much more real than religious feelings. Because bottom line, Judaism is not a religion. Jews are not a religious people. Even the religious ones are not religious. They're Jewish. Can't help that. So if you show that you're Jewish, that makes you religious? No, you're just an obnoxious Jew. A conspicuous Jew. But all you're doing is being Jewish. More visible, less visible, whatever. Twice a year, 10 times a year, whatever. But basically what you're doing is you're being Jewish, not religious. So the Jew who comes to the synagogue once a year and does nothing else, if that's even possible, and the Jew who comes to the synagogue every single day, twice a day, who's more religious? There's no religion going on here. And that's why it's such a ridiculous argument. The Orthodox are more religious than the Reform. God forbid. We're not supposed to be religious. So there can't be more religious, less religious. Not in Judaism. If it's not a religion, how can you be more religious? How can you be less religious? So what is it about? It's about being Jewish. Well, can you be more Jewish? Can you be less Jewish? You can't.